Hey, I'm Chris. I've taught SolidWorks to designers, engineers, and students for over 15 years, and this series is focused on the skills that make everything else easier. In this final Sketching Essentials video, we'll bring everything together. I'll walk you through fully defining a real sample part and show you how to use trim, convert entities, offset entities, and mirror entities. These tools will save you time and clean up your workflow. So let's jump in. These lessons you're about to see are taken from my full SolidWorks for Designers course on Udemy, where I go deeper into the tools and provide project files to follow along. If you want to learn faster with additional content, practice files, and support, check out the full Udemy course linked below. I think we've learned enough about adding dimensions, okay, and relations. We will do more as we create more geometry. What I would like you to do is close that sketch, and you can hide that sketch. We'll delete it later. Why don't you go back to the first sketch shape that you've created, and if you've managed to accidentally delete it, just redraw it. But now I want you to add some dimensions. Now, there's a little trick that I've just shown you here, which is called a mouse gesture. Mouse gestures let you use your mouse to select tools rather than going up to the toolbar. One of the most common mouse gestures I use is the dimension tool, and that is right-click, drag up. Give that a go. If it doesn't work for you, just click on the Smart Dimension tool here. And what I want you to do is add the following dimensions. Going to add a dimension of this line of 10. Now, you would have noticed that when I first clicked on that, it said 49, but when I hit 10, nothing changes. What happens with the very first dimension you add to a sketch, it resizes everything to suit that dimension. So you don't lose the proportions that you've been working in. It resizes it for you, which is great. But it only works on the first dimension. Keep that in mind. Going to add a 10 there. Going to add a 5 here. We're going to add a 5 to this line. I'm going to add a 12 to the middle circle. We're going to then add an angle dimension. So between this line and this line, I'm going to make it 2. Actually, let's make it 10. So it's a little bit clearer to see. Now, sometimes as you're adding your dimensions, the parts can move and they can go inside themselves, etc. What you can do is just click and drag to resize to suit before you add those additional dimensions. On this little line here, you're going to make that 1.5. And now I want to show you two special types of dimensions. Whenever you've got a construction line, if you click a line and then the construction line, depending on where you hold your cursor, you can have like half or double. Or let's say like a radius or a diameter. We can dimension from the outside line to the middle, or the outside line to an imaginary outside line on the other side. So where I want this, later we're going to mirror this whole sketch. It's going to be 10 millimeters across the middle. Now with this position here, I can leave my cursor here, I can move it to the left and drop, and that's going to give me a full width that goes all the way across. Okay. You can do the same thing for holes that you're going to draw. So I want to do the same thing for this line at the bottom. But I want that one to be 12. Okay. Now you can see as we add dimensions to these bottom lines, they're starting to become black because those are fully defined. These ones at the top, which aren't. So I'm going to grab now a dimension from the top line to this middle line, and then just drag down. And I'm going to make that 72. And now I'm going to correct the dimension. This 12. I'm going to make that 24, and I'm going to dimension between these two circles. That's going to be 5. And now our sketch is fully defined. You will notice this construction line here that has a blue endpoint and it can be dragged. But as I've mentioned before, construction lines do not count for something to be fully defined. Close the sketch, accept the changes, hit Control S to save your file. And now we'll move on to Advanced Sketch Tools. And now we'll move on. And that's it for this lecture. See you in the next one. Okay, hey guys, in this lecture, we are looking at refinement tools for sketches. And what that relates to is on the sketch toolbar, not creating the geometry with the lines and rectangles and circles, but actually manipulating that geometry using other tools such as trim, convert, we'll look at offset, I'll also look at mirror. For the CSWA, the only tools it lists are offset, convert, and trim. So no mirror is listed, but we'll show that one anyway because it's a very, it's a fundamental tool to simplifying your workflow. So we're back to our part. We want to edit the sketch, and first I'm going to look and explain the trim tool for you. We will edit this sketch shortly, but I just want you now to draw a couple other shapes, a couple of lines, just like that. Just play around. Okay, create a few things on the screen. And then I want you to hit trim entities. Now, trim entities here has a hotcut. I've set it with a hotkey of the letter T. Now, I'm not sure what the default is for trim entities, but given that's a tool I use so often, it was one of those things that I customized my user interface to make it that T on the keyboard. We'll go to my power trim. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. You're going to right click, click customize, click keyboard. We're going to search for trim, and we're looking under sketch tools, trim, and you can see that's where I've put in the shortcut T. So if I wanted to make trimetric a shortcut, let's say I want that to be Shift T. I click it there, and it's going to make a trimetric view under other with the keyboard hotkey of Shift T. And you press OK to accept. So trim entities. Now, it gives you a little bit of an explanation, particularly when you hover over the button as well. There's a few different ways that trim can be used. Trim entities, hold down and drag your cursor across the entities, or pick on an entity and then pick on a bounding entity or anywhere on the screen. To extend entities, hold down the Shift key and drag your cursor along the entities. A lot of entities in that description. An entity is a line or an arc or any of those sketch segments. Now, the usual trim tool you will use is power trim. The other trims, corner, trim away inside, trim away outside, trim to closest. They have their uses, but they're a bit more niche. Usually, power trim tool can do all of these things if you make your selections in the right way. There's also some options at the bottom. Keep trim entities as construction geometry. If I tick that, what that means is if I draw over this line here, it's not actually going to delete it. It's going to change it for construction. That can be quite handy. I can't undo that by trimming over it again, but if I go Control Z, that will undo. Also, ignore trimming of construction geometry, which means if I draw my trim lines over this rectangle, it's going to trim on the outside line. Sorry, let me uncheck that box, that top box. It's going to trim over the outside line, but it's going to completely ignore the construction lines. Okay, can be, again, a handy tool. Let's say you've created a lot of reference sketches, reference geometry that is construction lines, and you want to keep them, but you want to trim away some other stuff. You can use that tool, that little checkbox there. Now, to be completely honest, I've never ever in my lifetime used those two boxes, but if I come across a situation now where I think they're useful, I will. The main tool I want to show you here and describe is power trim, because I think it's going to do probably 95% of what you need. So when you want to trim, usually when you're creating specific geometry, you're doing a particular shape, and that shape requires multiple shapes to create it. For instance, let's say I want this rectangle, but I want this curve down the bottom. And the best way for me to create it was to do the full rectangle and then do this circle. Well, how power trim works is you click your mouse down and it's drawing this line, and you can see that on screen. Now that line, let's not call it a line, let's call it a snake, a trim snake. Anywhere that snake passes over, it's going to eat and trim away. So I can go over all of these and it's going to remove all of them. All right. When you let go of the mouse, it will end that trim section, and you can Control Z to undo if you accidentally make a mistake. The other thing you can do, there's a few things you can do with power trim. Another thing you can do is select a line and trim it back. So it's a bit hard to see on screen here, but I get a yellow preview where my cursor is. And as I'm dragging the line, the blue section on the left is becoming bigger. The orange section on the right becoming smaller. When I let go, has trimmed the line back to that point. Now, where this can be useful is you can also trim to extend. So when I drag it out to the left here, it's extending that line. And I can extend it all the way to another line like this by holding my cursor over that line. If I move my cursor past it, it's just going to keep going. And I can go to the next line or the next line. All right. So let's say I want to go to here. I let go. It's extended the line and it's added a coincident relation at that point. Very handy tool. To reverse it, I can just grab that, trim it back, and it's removed that coincident relation. So let's get to the main one we're looking at here, this circle. So if I want to trim away, what I can do is trim that circle edge, trim this edge, and trim this edge. And then I've got my rectangle geometry, but I've also got the arc that I wanted in that space. So that is how the trim tool works. What I would like you to do is just play around with these shapes and get a handle on the trim tool. And when you're feeling confident, what I'm going to get you to do is trim away some of the shapes over here. So I want you to go trim entities, use power trim, and we're going to draw a line over this outside circle and then the inside circle and let go. And then we're going to go to this point in the middle here and we're just going to draw a line up across this section of the arc here, and we're done. To finish with the power trim, you just press the tick or hit escape on the keyboard. And that is all you need to know about the trim tool. Now we're going to look at convert entities and offset. What we're going to do is, if you still have a secondary sketch in your file, delete that sketch. So we only want sketch 3 or your one single sketch in the file. What we're going to do now is create a new sketch. But what I'm going to show you, if we remember, this first sketch we've done is on the front plane. What happens if you want to do a sketch that's a bit further out from that plane? The way to do that is to create another reference plane, set a dimension. You can set it from this front plane, for instance, and then that will create a new plane that you can do a new sketch on. So to do that, we go to our features toolbar and we go to reference geometry and plane. And here you can put in up to 3 references, but sometimes you only need 1. We're going to click on the front plane and we have all these options here. The default option is to do a distance for a new plane. And we're going to change that distance to 20. Type that in and you can see what it's doing. It's creating new reference geometry. Okay. Reference geometry is planes, axes, and if we have a look at the drop-down menu here, it can also be coordinate system and points. Being able to use a plane is very helpful for a beginner. As you get more advanced with SolidWorks, there are other tools that let you move your sketch to where it needs to start and end just by using offset in your extrudes and cut extrudes. But there is regularly a time for using this tool. So I've created a second plane here. And if I click on that plane, I can see a dimension where it's coming from. Now, the reason I can see that dimension is because on my command manager here, there's a button called Instant 3D that is enabled. Instant 3D lets you drag handles, dimensions, and geometry to dynamically modify features, which means I can see this handle here. I can click and drag, and it's going to move that plane. Now, if you can't see that dimension when you click on the plane that you've created, it may be that Instant 3D is off. When that happens, you won't see that handle and that dimension. Now, all right, so the next tool we're going to learn about is convert entities. And we're doing this for a sketch. You can convert entities from a solid body or a surface as well. Convert entities is essentially like a copy. So we're copying some line work. And what we're going to do is on plane 1, we're going to start a new sketch. I'm going to select sketch 3. I'm going to press this button here, convert entities. And you can see the description. It says convert selected edges and sketch entities into identical entities by projecting them onto the sketch plane or face. So what it's doing is it's selecting these edges, it's going to project them onto the next plane, and we can see that here. We've got two separate sketches. The one that's black, that's the one that we've just converted, and it's fully defined because these are convert relations, which means that this edge, when you see this relation here, it says on edge 7, it's telling you that it's on the edge that's highlighted here. If I select another relation, you'll see it's on this edge over here. So if you have converted something, you can always go back and find out where it's referencing. Now, again, another issue a lot of beginner users get themselves into is converting entities, but then finding errors when a converted entity like this line disappears. And now I see we get an error in Sketch. And the error we can see on this line is because the reference geometry, so the original line, has been removed, has been deleted. This can happen very often when you're using like a solid body and you're converting an edge of the solid body into a new sketch. But in the order of your feature tree, you may have added a fillet or a chamfer, an edge detail, which has changed that edge, the geometry of the edge. And so the convert entity sketch no longer knows what it is referring to. It's a very typical error. Now, there's no way we can fix or reconvert an edge like this one here. You can, though, delete this relation, okay? And you can see because the other edges are still fully defined and converted, that there's actually no problem. This sketch still remains fully defined. I'm just going to undo those steps because I want to retain that line in this sketch. And that is how you convert sketches. Later, I will show you how to convert edges and sketches based on a solid body or a surface body. Now, on this second sketch, we're going to continue to edit sketch 4. And what I'm going to show you now is the offset tool. Now, while I do this, I'm just going to hide plane 1 and I'm going to hide the front plane. I've also hidden the original sketch, so this only sketch I'm looking at is the new one. Now, offset entities is here. The description, offsets one or more sketch entities by specified distance. For example, it creates a line offset from the selected line. If the entity changes, then the offset entity also changes when you rebuild the model. What this doesn't say, though, is that just like convert entities, if the original entity changes or disappears because it's changed by adding new features like a fillet or chamfer or something else, then once again, your offset can also have the similar failure to the convert entities. It's a bit of intermediate user stuff, but it is a regular issue of beginners. The offset tool works usually pretty straightforward. I'm going to show a couple of examples just on some sketches, and then we'll offset the original sketch. So I've drawn a circle and a line. I'm going to hit offset entities, and you'll see that there's some predetermined info in here and selections made. So there is a thick distance of 0.5 of a millimeter. Add dimensions and select chain is selected. Now, a chain is a series of sketches. An example of a chain here is these sketches on the left. You see how all these lines and arcs are all connected? That is one chain. Whereas if we look at over on the right, the circle is just a single entity, same as the line. So select chain doesn't matter if you're doing like a circle offset or a line offset, okay, because they're only one entity. If I'm selecting this one here, and I want to offset the entire shape, I need to select chain, and that will do that. So as you can see, I'm getting a preview with a yellow line. The yellow line is showing me the offset. And offset entities, it's going to create a new sketch entities within the current sketch that you're editing at the distance that you've set. Now, when you put add dimensions in, what that will do is create a dimension for the offset that you can change later. So I would always recommend having that one ticked. The reverse button is when you reverse the direction. So I hit reverse here, And you can see those previews, they all flip to the other side. Now, it's not always obvious, and in some cases, or some examples, you can see as I increase the thickness, what's happened in this offset to the right is a lot of the detail has been lost because the dimension is so big, it can no longer fit inside those edges. So that's something always to be careful of or aware of when you're using this tool. And if I was to do an offset entities like this, you can see how this line is like basically coming back on itself. That's probably going to lead to some errors. So you want to be careful with that. Now, bidirectional means the offset will go in both directions, inside and outside. That is very useful when you have some sort of shape that you've created and then you want to create, let's say, a cut or an extrude, or some other feature, which puts that new line that single line that you've done in the middle of the feature. I'll show some tricks with that in a minute too. You have cap ends. Now, cap ends can be done whether you're bidirectional or just single direction. And what the cap ends will do is where you have an open segment, so the one on the left and the one on the right are open segments, it's going to cap the end by joining it together. And it's going to do that here. The option is an arc. The other option is a straight line. Now, we see nothing for the circle, obviously, because it is already a closed segment. But we do here on this example see that we're getting a line or an arc in there for our cap. Now, if we hit bidirectional, the cap is going to go around the line that is in the middle of the object. Same here, essentially creating a slot for something like this. Then the last two options there are construction geometry. So like we saw with trim, and like we've already played around with construction geometry, you can convert, when you do this tool, your base geometry to construction. Now, your base geometry is the first sketch that you created, all right? Or the sketch. Your base geometry is the sketch that is being offset from. So in the case of the line here, it's the single line up the middle would change to for construction. This circle would change to for construction. And in this example, the black lines would change to for construction. That is one option. The alternate option, well, you can choose both. The other one is to make the offset geometry for construction. And you can see here, I'm getting a preview, which is showing dotted lines. It's a bit hard to see, but those yellow lines are for construction. So I'm going to leave all of those checked. I'm going to press base geometry and press OK. And we can see what's happened. Now, your offset will always be as defined as your original sketch is. So the original sketch from this profile, this chain on the left, was fully defined. So the offset is fully defined. Whereas the circle and the line over on the side here, they're not fully defined, but the offset will move with them. And if I extend this line, for instance, the offset again will move with it. Now, a couple of things to note. You can see here, when I do that bidirectional offset, it's going to create two dimensions. We didn't discuss this in the dimension section previously, but a black dimension is a dimension that is driving, which means that dimension controls the distance or the length or the relationship, whereas a gray dimension is driven, which means it is showing the dimension, but that's not a dimension that you can deliberately change. Let me explain in another way. Sure. If I have this line and I'm going to make it 10 long, I can add a second dimension to the line. And when I do, it's going to tell me that this dimension will make the sketch over-defined. All right, you can't have two dimensions on the same line saying different things or unknowns to solve. Do you want to add it as a driven dimension? And I can say yes, make it driven, okay. You can see this top line is gray. Top dimension is gray. Now, when I change the bottom dimension, that's the one that I can change. The gray one on the top updates, but is not driven by me. It's driven by the geometry. When we have a look at this offset, if I change this 1.5 to 2, it's going to change both at the same time because this was created from the offset entities tool. Okay. Now, just before we move on from offset, last thing I want to show you, I've seen an example over here. This is very hard to spot, but on this corner, we can see this yellow square highlighting this segment of sketch. And what's happened is you can see on the outside sketch, we actually have this line extends all the way up to the top. This line has a horizontal line here, but when that comes in, there's no room in the sketch to have that line there. And so what's happened is it's been removed, or it's so tiny. Let me zoom in all the way. We're unable to see it. When you see this kind of yellow box, my simple recommendation is draw a selection box over the top. It's going to select that line that is actually created there, which is too small to see. We can hit delete, and it's going to remove it. And then I don't have an error. I'm sorry I can't give you any more accurate detail on that issue, but that solves it. Okay, and that is how to use offset entities. So play around with that tool, and then when you're done, we're going to delete those sketches. We're going to delete plane 1, and we're going to go back to sketch number 3, and I'm going to show you how the mirror tool works. So mirror entities, the explanation here in the image shows a mirror selected entities about a center line or planar reference. So when you're mirroring, even in a sketch, this is in more recent versions of SolidWorks, I can use the right plane, which is this plane here, going through the middle, and I can do mirror entities, and I can select this sketch here, and it's going to create a duplicate on the other side of that plane. Sure. What's really good about mirror and these mirror relations that you can see is that these two act as one. Essentially, when you move one, the other one's going to change. Or when you increase the dimension of one, the other one's going to change. It's, again, very strong tool for your workflow. If you're able to process or understand the correct order of doing things, doing your sketches, it can save you a lot of time. Instead of detailing an entire product or entire sketch, two halves of an object, if they're symmetrical, just do one half. Do a mirror later, and it's going to save you a lot of time. Now, you don't have to mirror like a complete shape like this. You can just mirror segments. And so when we're looking at this shape down here, how to use the mirror tool, I can select mirror. I want to mirror about. Now, before we selected a plane, but you can also select any line. So you can mirror about a line. I can mirror about this line here or this line here. All right, just depends on your intent. If I select this line and then my entity to mirror is this one, you can see the yellow preview. It's creating a symmetrical line on the other side of this selection. What we want to do in this task is we want to mirror about this line in the middle, and the entities we want to mirror is everything that we've sketched here. Now I can draw a box and it's going to select everything, or I can right click on one of those segments. Let me try it again. I can right click on one of those segments and press select chain. Then I can press mirror, and I can press mirror about, and I can select the construction line in the middle. Now I want to create another copy of this line, so I've got to make sure that copy box is checked. But when I'm done, I press OK, and it has completely mirrored that sketch to the other side. And I'm going to close the sketch and accept. That's the mirror tool. There's not too much more to it. Again, very simple tool for your workflow. That ends this lecture on some of the refinement tools for your sketches, and it also ends this section on sketching essentials. Thanks so much for watching the final part of this SolidWorks Sketching Essentials series. I hope it gave you confidence to create smarter sketches in SolidWorks. Don't forget to check out my other playlists or head over to my Udemy course if you're ready to go deeper. See you in the next one.